In a village outside Kyoto, a woman named Setsuko, no last name given, because she asked for none, has been washing her face with the same thing every morning for 47 years. She is 81 years old. A dermatologist who examined her skin as part of a university wellness study in the early 2000s reportedly asked her twice whether she had ever had any cosmetic procedures. She had not. She had never purchased a single commercial face cream. Her monthly cost for skincare at the time of the interview was under $2. That number is not a typo. What she was using was not exotic. It was not rare. It was not the product of a patent or a lab. It was something her grandmother had handed her in a cloth bag and told her, "Do not stop." This channel exists because there is a version of Japan that the beauty industry has been happy to sell you sheet masks, snail mucin, cherry blossom essence in a glass bottle, and there is another version that those same companies would prefer you never find. The women in that other version are not influencers. They do not have YouTube channels. Some of them live at elevations where the nearest pharmacy is 40 minutes by car. And their skin, well into their 70s and 80s, carries a quality that most women half their age in the United States have stopped hoping for. Not smoothness manufactured by filler, density, translucency, a particular quality of surface that suggests the structure underneath is intact. This is not a tutorial. This is not a DIY channel. This is a documentary record of what those women actually do, why it works, and who decided you should never hear about it. Let's start with the substance itself. Rice bran, in Japanese, nuka, the outer layer of the rice grain separated during the milling process. For most of modern food history, it has been treated as a byproduct, the thing left over after you get to the white rice. In Japan, it was never treated that way. Since the Edo period, which began in the 17th century, Japanese women, particularly in Kyoto's traditional artisan and geisha districts, and in farming communities throughout the country, incorporated nuka into their daily bathing and skin washing routines. They carried it in small cloth pouches. They pressed it against their faces with water. They used it to polish, to cleanse, and to condition the skin in a single gesture that took perhaps 2 minutes. The chemistry, which we now understand better than they did then, explains why it works. Rice bran contains a compound called gamma-oryzanol, a group of antioxidants specific to the outer layers of the rice grain. It also contains tocotrienols, which are a form of vitamin E that is significantly more bioavailable than the synthetic tocopherol acetate added to most commercial moisturizers. It contains inositol, a B-complex component associated with cell membrane integrity, and it contains ferulic acid, the same ferulic acid that premium serums now charge $60 and $80 a bottle to deliver, positioned as a discovery of modern dermatological research. Rice bran has contained ferulic acid for thousands of years. The discovery happened long before the patent did. The practices I'm describing come from the daily lives of women in Okinawa Prefecture, the traditional districts of Kyoto, and the rural communities of Nagano, places where these methods have never been replaced by anything modern, because nothing modern has proven worth the trade. In Nagano, which consistently records some of the longest life expectancies in Japan itself, a country with one of the highest concentrations of centenarians on the planet, older women speak about nuka not as a beauty product, but as a household practice. In the same register, they might speak about miso or pickled vegetables. It is simply something you do. It requires no explanation because it has never been interrupted. That continuity is the thing, not the ingredient alone. Here is where it becomes important to understand what was interrupted elsewhere and why. In 1938, the United States passed the Federal Food, Drug, and Cosmetic Act. The intention was to bring some federal oversight to industries that had been operating without meaningful accountability. For cosmetics specifically, the Act established a regulatory framework that remained without substantial revision for the next 84 years. 84 years. The same foundational rules that governed what could go on American women's faces in the late 1930s were essentially the same rules still in place when the Modernization of Cosmetics Regulation Act was finally passed in. 2022. During those 84 years, the cosmetics industry grew into a market valued at hundreds of billions of dollars globally. Thousands of new synthetic compounds entered formulations, and the body responsible for evaluating cosmetic ingredient safety, the Cosmetic Ingredient Review Panel, which has operated since 1976, was funded by the Personal Care Products Council, the industry's own trade association. The panel has reviewed over 4,000 ingredients. It has no enforcement power. It issues opinions. Companies are not required to act on them. This is not a conspiracy. It is a documented structural arrangement. The people reviewing whether an ingredient is safe are paid by the people who profit from using that ingredient. And the regulator, with actual authority, had not updated its fundamental framework for nearly a century. In that same period, synthetic retinol entered mainstream cosmetics in 1971, marketed as a breakthrough anti-aging compound, and it does have real effects on skin cell turnover. The research supports that. But the framing that accompanied it, the idea that this was a new discovery, a modern answer to an ancient problem, quietly repositioned everything that had come before as primitive and unproven. Grandmother's cloth pouch with rice bran was not a product. It could not be patented. It could not generate a margin. So it was not marketed, and therefore, in the logic of the modern beauty conversation, it barely existed. The woman I want you to know about is 68 years old, a retired school teacher who lives about 40 minutes outside Nagano City. She has 3 adult children. She started using nuka the way her mother taught her, pressed in cloth, used in the bath every morning when she was in her early 20s, and has not stopped. Her monthly cost for this practice is negligible. She buys nuka in bulk from a local mill, the same way she buys miso ingredients. She told a researcher from a Japanese wellness documentation project, "I never thought of it as beauty. I thought of it as cleanliness. The beauty was just what happened." She had never in her life purchased a commercial anti-aging cream. When the researcher showed her photographs of the brands sold at major American retailers and described the price points, she was quiet for a moment. Then she said she felt sorry for those women, not with pity, with the particular sadness of someone watching people pay for something they already had. Here is the number that changes everything. In a study published in the Journal of Nutritional Science and Vitaminology, fermented rice bran, which activates the antioxidant compounds through the lacto-fermentation process that Japanese households have used for generations, showed measurable increases in the absorption of ferulic acid and gamma-oryzanol into the dermal layer compared to unfermented bran. The difference in absorption rate was significant enough that the researchers concluded the fermentation step was not cosmetic, not cultural, it was functional. The grandmothers who fermented their nuka beds ostensibly for pickling vegetables were inadvertently, or perhaps quite deliberately, upgrading the bioavailability of what they put on their skin. The kitchen and the skincare practice were the same practice. This is not incidental. The integration of fermented foods with skin health is something traditional Japanese practice arrived at empirically through generations of women noticing what worked, before the science had the vocabulary to explain it. Fermentation introduces beneficial organic acids, increases vitamin B concentrations, and creates compounds that support the skin's own microbiome, the community of microorganisms on the skin surface that modern dermatology has only recently begun to take seriously as a factor in aging. It is worth pausing here, because the word microbiome has already been captured by the marketing machine and attached to products with pH-adjusting cleansers at $45 a bottle. What Kyoto women were doing in the 18th and 19th centuries, wiping down with fermented bran water, maintaining a mild, slightly acidic surface environment on the skin, was microbiome supportive before the concept existed in any scientific literature. The word is new. The practice is 300 years old. Now, Japan is not alone in this. Women in ancient Rome used fermented grain washes and olive oil preparations not because they were health conscious in the modern sense, but because those were the materials that were available and that were understood through long use to maintain skin condition. Ancient Egyptian cosmetic practices documented extensively in papyri and tomb preparations, relied heavily on plant-derived oils and fermented resins. In Persian traditions, rosewater combined with grain-based preparations was used for daily skincare, particularly among women in court and artisan communities. Ayurvedic practice in India developed the use of turmeric and fermented dairy specifically for skin maintenance preparations that modern research has since confirmed contain substantial concentrations of anti-inflammatory and antioxidant compounds. These cultures did not talk to each other. They did not share formulations. They arrived at similar answers independently across thousands of years. That matters. It means we are not looking at a regional folk belief. We are looking at convergent empirical evidence, women in geographically and culturally isolated communities repeatedly arriving at fermented grain and plant antioxidants as the answer to the same biological question. Japanese women did not invent these principles. They simply never stopped practicing them. That distinction, preserved, not invented, is the difference between wisdom and marketing. What the modern industry did was not discover something new. It isolated, synthesized, and patented the compounds these practices had always contained, stripped the surrounding context, and sold them back at a price that made the original inaccessible by comparison. Not because the original had been disproven, because the original could not be owned. If you have spent money on serums that contain ferulic acid, on moisturizers advertised for their fermentation complex, on products positioned as drawing from Japanese botanical traditions, you were not entirely wrong about the direction. The direction was correct. The address was off. Nuka, unfermented, is available at Japanese grocery stores and online suppliers in the United States for a few dollars a pound. Fermented nuka, the lacto-fermented bed that Japanese households have maintained continuously for generations, requires a starter, time, and a kind of attention that is closer to tending than to purchasing. It is not complicated. It is not glamorous. It smells of earth and fermentation and old wood, which is to say it smells like something real. You rinse your face with the liquid that rises to the top of a nuka bed that has been fermenting for several weeks. Or you use a thin cloth bag filled with fresh nuka pressed gently against wet skin. In both cases, you do not scrub. You press and release the way you would handle something you respected. The women who taught this to their daughters did not describe it as anti-aging. That is our frame, not theirs. They described it as maintenance. The Japanese phrase for this kind of quiet, ongoing care, teokakeru, roughly, to apply hands, to give something your steady attention over time applies equally to a lacquer tray, a garden path, a fermented bed, and a face. The assumption built into the phrase is that the thing you are caring for is worth caring for indefinitely. Not fixed, not corrected, maintained. That is a fundamentally different relationship with your own skin than the one the modern beauty industry has spent decades constructing, where the skin is a problem, aging is a failure, and the solution is always the next product, the next formula, the next breakthrough. The women of Nagano's mountain villages, Kyoto's artisan quarters, and Okinawa's coastal communities are not waiting for the next breakthrough. They did not stop in 1938 and start again in 2022. They did not interrupt themselves. And the evidence of that continuity is visible plainly on their faces. Have you ever come across a traditional skin or hair practice, something passed down in your family or in a community you belong to, that has quietly worked in ways no product ever matched? Tell me where you are from and what it was. And I want to ask you something more personal. Do you remember watching an older woman in your family take care of her skin? A grandmother, an aunt, a neighbor? Something she did every morning that seemed unremarkable at the time, but that you find yourself thinking about now. If you are the kind of woman who believes that real knowledge has been quietly pushed aside to protect someone else's profit, you already know what to do. There is something I have not told you yet about what happened specifically to Japanese women's beauty traditions during the American occupation of Japan after 1945, when Western cosmetics companies entered the Japanese market under conditions that were not entirely voluntary, and what that period permanently displaced. The dated record of that decision and the specific corporate names attached to it will be in the next video. What it displaced has never fully returned. Some of it only survives in places that occupation never fully reached.